Thank you, Lois. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Kim and I work in our marketing department, and I'm also a member of our Diversity Council, which was established in 2019. And on behalf of our Diversity Council, welcome to our council's first event of 2021. I'm happy to introduce our presenter today, Dr. George McLaughlin. Some of you may recognize him as he has served on the Delta Dental Board of Trustees for more than 20 years. And he also serves on our foundation's board as a trustee and treasurer. He has and still does serve on several Delta Dental committees, including finance, governance, dental advisory, and more. Dr. McLaughlin was a practicing dentist in New Brunswick, New Jersey for over 40 years. He also held an appointment as a clinical associate professor in the Department of Restorative Dentistry at Rutgers School of Dental Medicine until June of 2015. While at the school, he served as director of the Office of Minority Affairs and as secretary, vice president, and president of their faculty organization called the Dental School Academic Assembly. Dr. McLaughlin served on numerous committees within the school, the dental school, and the university, including the Affirmative Action Council and the Admissions Committee. He also served as a faculty advisor to the Student National Dental Association chapter at Rutgers School of Dental Medicine. Dr. McLaughlin received his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from North Carolina A&T State University and a Doctor of Dental Medicine degree from UMDNJ, which is now known as Rutgers School of Dental Medicine. At the time of his graduation from UMDNJ, Dr. McLaughlin was one of the first 10 Black students in the school's history. In the 1960s, Dr. McLaughlin became part of a group of courageous African-American college students who refused to leave the segregated lunch counter of Woolworth's in Greensboro, North Carolina. The four initial protesters, known as the Greensboro Four, were fellow students. And although Dr. McLaughlin didn't know them well, he felt an immediate sense of solidarity. Like them, he grew up in the Jim Crow South. His hometown of Rayford, North Carolina had separate but unequal schools for Black students and one for Native American children who were subject to the same laws of segregation as Black residents. Dr. McLaughlin has shared that they had hoped that things would change through education. That's the reason he went to school. His parents, who were farmers, told him, get an education because that's something no one can take away from you. Dr. McLaughlin's activism didn't end at the Woolworth's lunch counter. In New Jersey, he fought discriminatory housing practices, joining protests in Essex County during the 1960s and 1970s. More than 60 years after the milestone Woolworth's protest, Dr. McLaughlin is joining us today to share more of his inspirational and historic stories and highlight other key members of the civil rights movement. So thank you very much, Dr. McLaughlin, for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Kim, for that outstanding introduction. This is I'll speak today basically on what is one person can make a difference. But first of all, I'd just like to say why we have Black History Month. Black History Month was started by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1926 as a Black History Week. It was a time to recognize the many contributions of African Americans. Dr. Carter G. Woodson spent most of his youthful years in the coal mines of West Virginia. After teaching himself English and arithmetic, he graduated from Berea College. He earned a master's degree from the University of Chicago, and he proposed that the second week in February be recognized as African American Heritage Week. And that was because of the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln, which is February the 12th, and Lincoln being the one who signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and Frederick Douglass, an abolitionist, whose birthday was February 20th. Black History Month was proposed by a group of Kent State University students in 1969. And it was changed from Black History Week to Black History Month. In 1976, President Gerald Ford urged all Americans to seize this opportunity to honor the two often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans. So since then, we've celebrated Black History Month. Now, one person can really make a difference. And if Elijah McCoy, the son of former slaves that had escaped to Canada, did when he invented an automated lubricating apparatus for large locomotives and large equipment. He received a patent for his invention June 23rd, 1872. When buyers came to purchase equipment with the automatic lubricating device, the question was always asked, is this the real McCoy? And that question has stayed with us over the years. So if you hear someone say, is this the real McCoy, then you know where it came from. It came from Elijah McCoy, an African-American who had got a patent for that in 1872. Another African-American, Lewis Latimer from Massachusetts, invented an improvement to the electric light bulb. In those years, electric light bulbs were made from carbon filaments. Today, they're now made from tungsten filaments. And Mary McLeod Bethune, she was one who made a difference also. She started the Daytona Normal and Industrial School for Negro girls in Daytona, Florida. It grew over the years to 1923. It merged with the Cookman College, and now it continues to be the Bethune-Cookman University, which is still in Daytona Beach today. Dr. Charles Drew made a difference. He was a surgeon, a researcher. He developed a technique for separating plasma from blood and storing it for future use during World War II. He organized and directed the blood bank for blood plasma for the United States Army and Great Britain during World War II. And even in those days, you were not allowed to store blood from African Americans with that of white Americans. It had to be segregated. Dr. Drew was fatally injured in an automobile accident in 1950. Jackie Robinson, I'm sure you're all familiar with Jackie Robinson, the first Black athlete to play in the major leagues. Dr. Samuel D. Proctor. Dr. Proctor was president of two HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, Virginia Union University in Richmond, Virginia, and North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro. He was a mentor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. DeForest B. Soares, and also Jesse Jackson, who was also a student at North Carolina A&T. And Dr. Martin Luther King, we all know Dr. King's track record, from the Montgomery bus boycott to the March on Washington and his famous I Have a Dream speech. Rosa Parks, she made a difference when she refused to vacate the first 4 rows in the colored section in favor of a white passenger once the white section was full. Because during that time, Blacks were not allowed to ride in the front of the bus. It had to be in the back. But she refused to get up and move. And of course, Rosa Parks was arrested during that time. Dr. DeForest B. Soares has served as the senior pastor of the First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens in Somerset since 1990. His ministries include and focuses on spiritual growth, educational excellence, and economic empowerment. He founded the Central Jersey Community Development Corporation as an organization that specializes in revitalizing distressed neighborhoods, and Harvest of Hope, an organization that develops permanent solutions for children in foster care. He served as New Jersey's first African-American Secretary of State from 1999 to 2002 in the Whitman administration. Two books he authored are Say Yes to No Debt, 12 Steps to Financial Freedom, and Meditation for Financial Freedom. He is also a Delta Dental New Jersey Foundation trustee. The Civil Rights Movement was an organized effort by Black Americans to end racial discrimination and gain equal rights under the law. It started in the 1940s and ended in the 1960s. Probably one of the most impactful movements ever in the country. The movement was peaceful and nonviolent and resulted in the passing of laws to protect constitutional rights of all Americans, regardless of race, color, sex, or national origin. We look at the civil rights time frame and the things that happened during it. A few of them are, in July 26, 1948, President Harry Truman issued an executive order 9981 to end segregation in the armed forces. May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education, consolidated, effectively ending racial segregation in public schools. And in August 28, 1955, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old kid from Chicago, was brutally beaten and murdered for allegedly flirting with a white woman. His killers were acquitted, and he was actually beaten so bad until you couldn't tell that he was really still a human. The funeral director advised his mother to have a closed casket funeral, but his mother refused to have a closed casket funeral because she said, "I want the world to see what has happened to my baby." That photograph was published first in the Jet magazine, and it went viral. The case brought international attention to the civil rights movement. December 1st, 1955 was when Rosa Parks refused to give her seat to a white man on a city bus in Montgomery, Alabama. On January 10th and 11th, 1957, since there was so much going on in the civil rights movement, 60 Black ministers, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., met in Atlanta, Georgia to coordinate nonviolent protests against racial discrimination. September 4th, 1957, 9 Black students, later to be known as the Little Rock Nine, were blocked from integrating Little Rock Central High School. They blocked it long enough that President Eisenhower eventually sent federal troops to escort the students to and from the school. In September 9, 1957, President Eisenhower signed the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which allows prosecution of those individuals who might suppress another person's right to vote. And in November 14, 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was escorted by 4 armed federal marshals to become the first student to integrate William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans. This inspired a painting by Norman Rockwell. If you've seen the painting by Norman Rockwell, you see two armed marshals walking in the front of this little 6-year-old and two armed marshals walking behind her with the caption, "The problem we all live with." Freedom Riders in 1961. These were individuals who were riding through the South to protest segregated lunch counters and terminals on the bus route, and restrooms too, of course. This was the time that 3 of the civil rights workers were lynched in Mississippi. They were Swerner, Goodman, and Cheney. Their bodies were found later on in shallow graves. On June 11, 1963, Governor of Alabama, George C. Wallace, stood in the doorway to prevent Blacks from entering the University of Alabama. He stood in there long enough that President Kennedy had to send the National Guard troops to the university to remove the governor from the doorway. In June 12, NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers was shot in the back in his driveway of his Jackson, Mississippi home by individuals that were against his signing folks up to vote. His killers were sent to prison in 1994. In 2017, President Barack Obama designated Evers' home a National Historic Landmark. And then on August 28, 1963, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom and the I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where he said, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." And September 15, 1963, a bomb was set off at the 16th Street Baptist Church, Birmingham, Alabama, that killed 4 little Black girls who were sitting there waiting to go to Sunday school, and injured several other people. Angry protests, of course, broke out about that. On September 15, 1963, July 2nd, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, preventing discrimination due to race, color, sex, the religion, organ, or national organ. It also established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which prevents workplace discrimination. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X, a Muslim minister and human rights activist, was assassinated during a rally by members of the Nation of Islam. On March 7, 1965, about 600 marchers attempted to walk from Selma to Montgomery, protesting barriers of voting. April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. May 25th, 2020, a police officer knelt on the neck of George Floyd for allegedly passing a counterfeit $20 bill. This sparked a worldwide outrage and multiple protests against police brutality and injustice against people of color. The Black Lives Matter movement was born. People of all colors participated in the movement. The fight for equality still continues, as evidenced by the recent insurrection on the United States Capitol, which was initiated by a volatile and insightful speech given by the then President of the United States. 61 years ago, February 1st, 1960, 4 young college freshmen sat down at a Woolworth lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and started a movement that changed the entire public accommodation in this country. They will forever be known as the Greensboro Four. There were Jabril Kassan, who was at that time known as Ezell Blair, Franklin McCain, David Richmond, and Joseph McNeil. The 4 freshmen sat at the lunch counter until the store closed. Needless to say, they were refused service. The next morning, about 20 students from North Carolina A&T sat at the counter. Prior to sitting down, each student made a purchase. The students were all refused service until July 25th, 1960, when 3 Black individuals were served. What would happen at that, we as students in North Carolina A&T would go downtown sometimes buy school supplies that we needed. Then all we wanted to do was have a sandwich and have a drink. But we were refused. We could buy it, but we could not sit down and eat it or drink it. We had to stand or take it out of the store. Where are those individuals now, the 4 individuals that sat down? Jabril or Ezell Blair graduated from North Carolina A&T. Then he went on to Howard University, got a degree in law, but he came back to Greensboro, was not able to get a job because he was considered a troublemaker. Later on, he moved to New Bedford, Massachusetts, where he worked with developmentally disabled people. David Richmond from Greensboro, North Carolina, found it difficult getting a job in Greensboro as well. He moved to the mountain community of Franklin, North Carolina for 9 years. Then he returned home to take care of his elderly parents. David died in Greensboro in 1990 at the age of 49. Franklin McCain received a BS in chemistry and biology, worked for the Celanese Corporation in Charlotte, North Carolina until he retired. Franklin died July 2014. Joseph McNeil from Wilmington, North Carolina, received a BS in engineering physics. He was commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the United States Air Force. Joe retired as a major general from the Air Force and now lives in Hempstead, New York. We have another difference maker today, and that's Kizmekia Corbett, a professional immunologist at the Vaccine Research Center, where she is a lead member of the coronavirus research team. Her total focus, along with her medical team, is on the coronavirus vaccine. So those of you and us that are receiving that vaccine, we know that there was one difference maker, Dr. Corbett, who is the lead scientist on that. In politics, we made strides with the election of the 44th president, Barack Obama, and recently the election of Vice President Kamala Harris. One person can make a difference in people's lives. Believe what you do matters and we'll make a difference in people's lives. You don't have to save the world in one stroke, but you can make a difference one person at a time. I thank you very much for your attention and the opportunity to speak with you during this African American Heritage Month. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. McLaughlin, for your efforts in the civil rights movement and your informative presentation. This brings us to the Q&A portion of our program. Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Rhodes. I'm part of the Planning and Product Development Department, and I'm also part of the Diversity Council. Just as a reminder, a video recording of this presentation will be available via YouTube and our Diversity Council and our diversity calendar in our Diversity Council webpage on our company's website. A link to both this presentation and our prior presentation will both be available, will be emailed after today. As you all may be aware, prior to today's session, all of our associates were given an opportunity to submit their questions to Dr. McLaughlin. Due to a very enthusiastic response, we saw more than 20 thought-provoking questions, and they were all submitted, but unfortunately, due to the time we have limited today, Dr. McLaughlin will only be able to answer a few of those. So let's get started. Dr. McLaughlin, what has been your most impactful or memorable moment as a civil rights activist?
The civil rights movement was mostly protest by African Americans and a few white people. The Black Lives Movement was probably the most impactful one.
A second question we'd like to address to you is, have you ever written a book about your experiences?
No, I have not.
I'm sure if you ever do, you will have a lot of enthusiastic people running to the bookstores to buy it, though. As our third question, Dr. McLaughlin, how did you become a member of our Board of Trustees and our Foundation's Board of Trustees?
I was selected by a search committee made up of from the Board of Trustees.
Thank you. What advice would you give today to a young minority person?
What you should do is know what you want to do, what you want to be, and what you want to gain out of life. Prepare yourself for it, and then, of course, go for it. Keep your eye on the prize.
Thank you. That's wonderful advice. Okay, as our fifth question, Dr. McLaughlin, what were your experiences like while studying to be a dentist? When you were a professor, did Rutgers have initiatives to assist students of color? A two-part question.
Studying to be a dentist was like working a full-time job, and one that you worked overtime on every day, including weekends. As an individual, as a teacher, I was one of the advisors to not just the African American students, but all the students. So there was no, during the time that I was a student, there was no real help for African American students per se, but there was help for all students.
That's good to know. Hopefully they have made some efforts in the meantime. Okay, as another question, can you share with us what you see as the similarities or the differences between the civil rights movement you lived through and the Black Lives Matter movement today?
The civil rights movement that I lived through was basically a movement by African Americans and a few white people to gain equal opportunity. The Black Lives Matter movement today is fully integrated, and it is covered. You'll see the participants by all people of all races, of all colors, creeds, and especially after the murder of George Floyd, it really grew by leaps and bounds, really.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. McLaughlin, what role do you think technology and social media have played in raising awareness of bias and racism?
Everybody has a camera. If you have a cell phone, you have a camera. No one can hide. And as you know, that if you looked at the media, it's like comparing the light you get from a match with the light you get from a 300-watt light bulb. It has been such an explosion in media. If you look back, when I was growing up, it may take days to get a story out. Today, it takes seconds. So media has really played quite a role in everything that we do, including civil rights.
I couldn't agree with you more. Dr. McLaughlin, thank you so much for your provocative presentation today and for reminding us of all the efforts in the civil rights movement. Thank you for your efforts in the civil rights movement. We certainly have been encouraged today for each one of us to make a difference in large and small ways. We want to remind everyone that this event has been recorded, and that a recording of this presentation will be available via YouTube. And we have a diversity calendar, which is going to be released. It will later this week. The Diversity Council webpage will have that Diversity Council on it. It'll be on our company's website, and you will see links to this presentation and an earlier event that Diversity Council was privileged to present. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to you being part of other Diversity Council events. We can't thank you enough, Dr. McLaughlin, and everyone for taking out the time today to join us and think about how they can make a difference in the civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and in today's events going forward. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.